are over the moon excited to welcome Nancy Parkes. Looking forward to the day that we get to say Dr. Nancy Parkes in the somewhat near future. For those of you who don't know, Nancy is an educational consultant and founder of JTeach Now. Much of her work is focused on helping Jewish educators and directors integrate social, emotional, and spiritual learning into whatever setting they're working with. For the past 2 years, Nancy has supported and mentored educators enrolled in a certification program in social emotional learning at Rutgers University as they translate their learning into Jewish educational settings. She's also a founding member of SESL for Jewish Ed, a collaborative for promoting holistic growth for learners and educators in all Jewish settings. Nancy served as the director of congregational learning at Temple Israel Center in White Plains for 10 years. We know she has actual experience with running a school and teaching and all that sort of stuff, not just a theoretical professor. And she has created a new model of education that included full-time community educators. Nancy has already received her MA or earned her MA degree in Jewish Studies and Education from the William Davidson School of Education at JTS, and is currently earning her EdD there, which is why I seriously say we look forward to calling you Dr. Parkes in some time frame, whatever that is. So Nancy, I'll turn it over to you, and thank you so much for being here with us.
Thank you so much. First of all, I loved that introductory song. I actually was thinking maybe I should have come up with a song. I should have sang a little bit to tell you about myself, but I'm going to spare you my voice. Let me share my screen with all of you and we'll get started. Let's just make sure we can share. Well, while it is loading, I just want to say I'm thrilled to be learning with all of you this morning. 2 things before we begin. Please have a piece of paper and something to write with nearby. And if you printed out the text that you were sent that we're going to be exploring and discussing in a little bit, have that accessible as well. I also want to acknowledge and recognize all the wisdom and experience you bring to our learning today. Please share your wisdom with us, your thoughts, your ideas, your insights, your questions. You can put it in the chat. Rabbi Dreffin is going to be taking a look at that throughout. So please share your wisdom with us. It will be a richer conversation when we all learn together. So what is our learning going to look like? We're going to start with a check-in. You bring your whole selves to our learning today. Maybe you had a leisurely morning. Maybe you feel like you already put in a full day. We're going to check in. We're going to see how you're doing. We're going to see how each other are doing. We're going to be talking about the connection between relationships, emotions, and learning. Intuitively, you may be aware of these connections. We're going to unpack this and talk about why it's important to be intentional about them. Now, there's a lot of teaching today around character development, Jewish values, midot, positive psychology, and thriving. All really important. We're going to define social emotional learning, what it is, and why it's important so we're all on the same page. I'm going to be talking about why we need to pay attention to our own emotions as well as those of our learners. That's going to set the foundation for the rest of our learning. How do we teach social and emotional skills? What are some of the tools that we can use to teach them? And how do we integrate them into our daily schedules and curricula? I'm going to end with some thoughts and reflection. So before we start with that check-in, I want to talk a little bit about collaborative norms. Now, another term for collaborative norms could be norms of engagement in the classroom. You might call these classroom rules, maybe a classroom Brit or agreement. It's really important to talk about these norms as adult learners and certainly when we're learning online. So the idea behind creating these norms is to answer the question, how can we together create an optimal climate for learning? Because often our environment, or how we set up our environment, influences our learning experience. Now, there are a lot of us on this webinar, and I thank you so much for taking the time to be here this morning. So what I'm going to ask you to do is just add in the chat if there's a norm that you would like to add. I took the liberty of putting together a few, but certainly if there's not one on there that you feel you need, please put it in the chat and we'll make note of it. So the first norm is self-monitoring use of electronics. Maybe having your cell phone within arm's reach is distracting. Maybe not having your cell phone within arm's reach is equally as distracting. Perhaps there are multiple tabs on your computer open. That draws your attention elsewhere. Just be aware of this. Think about what you can do to help create an environment for optimal learning for yourself and for others. It's really hard to exercise wait time, especially online. We're going to try and pause when necessary. Also, we communicate a lot with our bodies. Body language can be challenging to read on Zoom, so let's be aware of the messages we're communicating with our eyes and our facial expressions. When people ask questions or they share a thought, we're going to seek to understand first. And we're also going to try to give space for everyone to be seen and heard. I just want to give a moment if you want to add anything else to the chat, and let's take note of it. Assume good intent, I love it. You don't know what is happening outside of the screen. Great. Okay. Thank you so much for sharing. Okay, so let's start with that check-in. I'm gonna ask you to find a comfortable seat, get in a comfortable position. If you feel comfortable, I invite you to close your eyes. You do not have to, you can kind of just lower your gaze. And what we're gonna do is take a slow, deep breath in through our nose and out through our mouth. Let that breath go. Again, take a deep breath in through the nose and let it go out through the mouth. And keeping your eyes closed or your eyes lowered, continue breathing at your own pace. And I just want you to notice what feelings emerge. Breathe at your own pace. What feelings emerge? And can you identify one word that best describes how you're feeling right now? And once you have that word, I want you to write it down on that piece of paper. I am going to be doing the same. So write that word, how you're feeling on that piece of paper. Maybe it's more than one word. I wrote 2. Now what I want you to do is take note of that emotion, that feeling that you wrote down. We're going to come back to this. Okay, let's take another deep breath in. Let it out. And let's begin. We can't talk about learning without talking about the power of relationships. Relationships between the teacher and the student, between students, between the student and the subject matter, and between the teacher and the subject matter. Now, why is this important? Because we know that when there exists a positive relationship, there's a better school climate. Kids just feel better. They feel safer to explore and to question and to share. And that leads to greater academic achievement. When kids feel safe, there's also less behavioral issues. And that leads to a more positive association with school and learning, which means that our learners are able to enter into the learning experience with a more positive attitude and less anxiety. And of course, this goes for learners of any age. So knowing this, and if we agree that learning is a relational and social process, then we can agree that our students need social skills to be successful and to be able to approach learning in a positive way. We also can't talk about learning without talking about emotions. Okay, just look at these adorable faces. Besides being incredibly cute, we have a pretty good idea of what they're feeling, right? Look at their facial expressions, their body language. Why is this important? Why are emotions important? Because like teaching, learning is an emotional experience. Emotions can motivate and focus attention, or they can completely hijack logical thinking and paralyze us. I want to give you an example. I want you to take a moment and think about a time when a colleague, a teacher, or a peer said something to you that completely changed your approach to learning. Their words encouraged you and motivated you to learn more. Or their words completely shut you down from learning. In a sense, it paralyzed you. I want you to take a moment and think about those two experiences. And if it's helpful, you can jot them down. Take a moment to think about it. That experience where their words motivated you, and that experience when it completely shut you down. Now, I'm fairly confident that you were able to think of both of these experiences. And I wouldn't be surprised if those same feelings you had during that experience began to emerge. And that's because emotions and learning are inextricably linked. And there's neuroscience and research to back this up. Emotions affect our learning. Now, look back at that word you wrote down on that piece of paper, that feeling. Look at it. Do you think that emotion is helping or hindering your learning right now? Is that emotion helping or hindering you? For now, just take note of it. We'll come back. Now, there are two things I want you to know about emotions. Emotions are not good or bad. They just give us information. I'm going to repeat that. Emotions are not good or bad. They just give us information. And emotions are contagious. And that's why it's really important as educators. We need to pay attention to our own emotions because we often set the emotional tone, the emotional climate in our learning spaces. Now, this idea that emotions are connected to learning, that there's a connection between affect and cognition, we need to pay attention to it is not new to Judaism. We're going to take a look at a text by Rav Kook. We're going to explore this in breakout rooms. We'll have about 10 minutes. Let me put the link to the Google Doc in the chat so everybody has it. If you printed it out, wonderful. Let me just get it.
We also just posted the PDF in the chat.
Oh, okay. Here's a link too. Thank you, Rabbi. One thing I want you to know about on the document, we have what's called, well, I gave you some questions, just guiding questions for your discussion. You can use them. If you find that your discussion's going in another direction, go with it. I'm also including what I call participation starters. This is based on the work of Orit Kent and Allison Cook and Havruta learning, when you're learning in pairs. Now, whereas there's some learners who feel really comfortable learning in pairs or small groups, we know them. They feel comfortable reading the text out loud. They jump in with their thoughts or their comments or ask questions. We also know that there are people who need to sit back. They may feel hesitant, or maybe they don't even know where to begin. Participation starters can help them enter into the conversation and stay engaged. So I've included them as well. They're all on the document, the text, the questions, and the participation starters. So Rabbi Jeffrin's going to put us in breakout rooms, I think 3 or 4 for about 10 minutes. Enjoy your learning, and I look forward to seeing you when you come back. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen so we can see everybody.
So great. Just to let you know, Nancy, Zoom forced me to put you in one, so you'll just have to leave.
I'm so happy to be in one. It's really okay.
So here we go, everyone.
And this meeting is being recorded, just so you know. Okay, so I want to talk about social emotional learning because that elevates this connection that we're talking about, and it gives learners, your learners and the educator, the skills to find that balance that Rob Cook speaks about. So let's first define it. What is social emotional learning? First of all, it's a process. It is not a 15-minute lesson that sits on a binder that you pull off the shelf that you teach on a Sunday morning or a Thursday afternoon. It's an approach to learning. And that approach leads to the acquisition of knowledge and skills and attitudes that can then be applied and which affect our actions, what and how we do things, so that we can develop healthy identities. We can identify and articulate and manage our emotions. We can understand what it means to show caring and empathy for someone. We can develop and maintain healthy relationships, and we can make responsible decisions. Now, the collaborative of academic and social emotional learning, it's called CASEL. They identify 5 competencies of social emotional learning. They're self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, relationship skills, and responsible decision-making. Now, I wish I had time to dive into all of them this morning, but today we're going to be focusing on self-awareness and self-management. Now, before we do that, I want to take a moment and talk about why social emotional learning is so important. We know relationships and emotions affect our learning, but what does the research tell us about social emotional learning when it's integrated into curricula and daily activities? The first thing is that kids just do better in school. Just to be clear, the teaching of social and emotional skills is done not at the expense of the acquisition of content knowledge. Rather, it enhances it. It leads to greater academic achievement. Learners also report having a more positive attitude about school and learning, and there are less behavioral challenges. And students aren't the only ones who benefit. Like students, teachers report a greater sense of well-being, less stress, and they actually report feeling better about the job they're doing. And lastly, it allows us to achieve our educational goals as Jewish educators. Now, I realize there are a lot of you on this webinar. If I asked each of you to list your top 3 educational goals, we'd have a fairly long list, and we certainly would not agree on the top 3 goals. But there's one goal that all parents and all teachers agree on. They want their learners, they want their kids to be mensches, to be good people who make a difference in the world. Now, we certainly want them to be knowledgeable. And we also want them to be caring and empathic individuals. We want them grounded in Jewish values who live their life according to those values. And that means that we can't just teach about Jewish values. We have to teach our learners the skills so they can actually live them. So I'm going to pause right now. I chose a pink pause button. I don't know why. I couldn't find another color. I want to just pause for a minute. And we've learned a lot already. We've done some text study. Just kind of want to pause, give everybody a chance to breathe a bit. And if there's any pressing questions or something that you want to share, Rabbi Dreffen, I don't know if there's been something that's been popping up in the chat.
Right now, I don't see that anyone has thrown in anything, but you haven't paused it to allow everyone. So we'll see.
If anything is pressing, please. I'm happy to take a minute.
While we do that wait time, there was a small question that I'll just let everyone know. We will make the slides available, and we are going to have this recording available again afterwards once we edit it down for clarity and content.
Okay. All right. So if everybody's pretty set and there are no pressing questions, I want to move on and talk a little bit about how do we teach these social and emotional skills, and what tools do we actually use to teach them? So this question, how do we acquire these competencies? How do we acquire these skills? Well, the first thing we have to do is teach them. Like any skills, social and emotional skills need to be taught. There's this erroneous assumption that these skills somehow will just be picked up along the way, or maybe that they'll be taught at home. We need to intentionally teach these skills. And like any good teaching, we have to scaffold the learning and teach them in a developmentally appropriate manner, just like any skill. We also need to model these skills. We want to model the skills that our students are learning so they can see them in action. Our learners, they learn an awful lot by observation, and they are acutely aware when our actions don't align with our words. Now, ideally, these skills are modeled by those in and out of the classroom, not only the teacher, but the ed director or principal, the clergy, administrative staff, lay leadership, custodial staff, parent, adults in and out of the community even. That's the ideal. We need to model these skills so that our learners see them in action. We also have to remember to prompt them or have a cue that serves as an important reminder of the skill and when and how best to implement it in a given situation, especially when they're first learning these skills.
Nancy, can I pause you for just a moment?
Yeah.
I know you do work with some of our communities in the South, but if you could speak a little louder and slightly slower. Some of us aren't used to the New York speed.
I'm happy to do that.
Thank you.
And I'll put my volume up too. Is that better?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, you're welcome. Yeah, you know, it's funny. We do speak, I guess, faster in New York, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to just take a breath for a minute. I'm just going to pause and I'm going to slow down a little bit. So thank you. The last thing that we need to do is practice these skills. We need to give our students multiple opportunities in various contexts to practice this skill that they're learning, so that when these skills are needed, they don't revert back to what they typically do. And with all practice, there needs to be praise, feedback, and reflection. How's that speed and volume?
Perfect.
Okay, thumbs up, everybody. Good. Okay, great. So with that, we're going to talk about self-awareness. Self-awareness is the ability to understand one's emotions, thoughts, and values, and how they influence behavior. Now, I've paired it with this text from Psalms. Teach us to count our days rightly, that we may obtain a wise heart. I just love this metaphor of a wise heart. So we're going to talk about, how do we do this? How do we learn this skill? Well, one of the tools that we can use are mood meters. A mood meter is an illustration. It's a visual map that provides us with shared language so that we can talk about emotions. Now, some of you may already be using mood meters and there's so many different kinds that are used effectively. The ones that I will be sharing are mood meters that allow for scaffolding of learning. So here's our first one. This is a mood meter used in an early childhood classroom. Now you'll notice that there are 4 quadrants of different colors with facial expressions depicting certain moods, certain feelings. Now, young children have a hard time identifying how they're feeling. Teaching children to name these feelings, which is what a mood meter does, builds emotional literacy and vocabulary so that they can identify and talk about their feelings. Again, this is a skill we need to teach them. Scaffolding this learning is important and shouldn't stop in early childhood classrooms so that our students continue to learn and become able to recognize more complex emotions and how they affect behavior and learning. And by the way, for all you early childhood educators out there, you rock at this. You spend a lot of time recognizing, acknowledging students' emotions. We need to continue doing that as our learners get older. So here are two more mood meters. The one on the left is a mood meter that a teacher created. The images represent children more or less around the same age as their learners. Now you'll notice there's the same 4 quadrants, the same colors. The one on the right starts to build emotional vocabulary by including words that can describe certain emotions associated with those quadrants and those facial expressions that you see. Now, why is it important to build an emotional vocabulary? Because by doing so, our learners will understand and become aware that there's a difference between feeling frustrated and feeling worried, feeling excited and feeling proud, feeling alone and feeling tired. Now, I want to give you an example. Now, I know for sure this never happens in your classrooms. A student tells you that they're bored. Again, I know it never happens. A lot of times, that child's not bored. They may be confused. They don't understand what they're supposed to be doing. They may feel alone. They may feel sad. They may feel distracted, but they're not bored. But they don't have the emotional vocabulary. They don't have the language to be able to share how they're feeling.
Nancy, we have a great question
Yeah.
about, even though hungry's not a mood, should there be a place for it since it affects so much learning?
Yes, yes. So listen, I live this. My husband, what is it called? Hangry? Like he needs to eat. So yes, that has to do with physical needs, right? So they're both important. If it's too cold, if it's too hot, right? That also, that learning environment absolutely affects emotion and how someone is going to learn. So yes, thank you. Maybe we should do a whole physiological mood meter. I don't know. Well, I'm going to think about that, but thank you so much for bringing it up. I absolutely. Okay, here's another. Oh, wait. Yeah, no, I did. Here's another one. These have emojis. We know that our kids love emojis, but you'll notice that same 4 quadrants, same colors, just building emotional vocabulary, maybe different words. Okay, and I want to show you one more. So this mood meter was created by Dr. Mark Brackett. He's the director of the Emotional Intelligence Center at Yale University. Now, a lot of people look at this and say, there are a lot of words on this. 4 quadrants, same colors, and yes, there are a lot of words. I actually have seen this when learning has been scaffolded, used very effectively in 3rd grade classrooms. So this is what I'd like to do now. Just take a look at the mood meter. Look at the words and get a general feeling of what the quadrants kind of represent, if you will. And I want you to think about, can you identify which quadrant you're in? What color are you? Now we've created a poll to answer this question. So take a look again at the mood meter. where are you on this mood meter? What color are you right now?
While people are voting, Nancy, two things in relation to our question before about, we're talking about confused in the word bored. One was just a comment about bored can sometimes also be unchallenged.
Yes.
And then the question for maybe you to discuss is, I don't see confused on the one we're using. So perhaps where would you put confused in terms of like what it would fall into as one of the 4 moods with this particular chart?
It's a great question. I'd probably put it on the red, but close to the, like on the bottom part. I wouldn't put it on the top. I put it on the bottom part of the red, but it's interesting. People can feel confused, and it's not necessarily, remember, emotions are not good or bad. They just give us information. So someone can feel confused, but be motivated to learn more, or feel confused and shut down. So I think you'd have to figure out, what is that confusion leading to in order for you to decide which color you'd want to go to. Now, look, these mood meters are not, they're certainly not perfect, and they're guides. And remember, they're visual representations so that we can build that emotional awareness, that self-awareness, and build that emotional vocabulary. Great tools. And again, you can even create your own mood meters, which we're going to talk about in a minute. Now, just take a minute and look at the results of the poll. And you'll see that there are emotions in every quadrant, and that's typical. And sometimes someone will say, well, I feel an emotion in blue and I feel an emotion in yellow. That's typical too. What we're trying to do is to use these mood meters to build that self-awareness so that they can start to not only identify their emotion, but understand how it's affecting their learning and their behavior. And we're going to be talking about that with self-management in a minute.
Nancy, I just want to point out, a couple of people have noticed that while you said that there are no judgments in the emotions, the colors are naturally kind of doing that. And I'll just say, as a plug for using the Institute, if someone loves this particular mood meter and wanted the staff, their program associate or us to recreate it with a different set of colors, to maybe say that, you know, green means go, let's change up our colors, maybe a fuchsia or maroon and that sort of stuff, that we'd be happy to do that.
And I'll add to that we bring the judgment to the emotion, right? We bring that judgment to it. Now, if you ask Dr. Mark Brackett, he would rate these. He has to use some language, so he would say pleasant and unpleasant. But I just want to give you an example. When you say judgment, let's use the emotion of anger. And I'm just going to stop. I'm going to get rid of the poll for a minute, if that's okay. Let's talk about anger. Anger's not necessarily quote unquote bad. Anger can be a motivating emotion for social justice, for social change. So again, it's how do we use that anger? How do we manage that anger? And what results in our behavior from that anger? So I think that that's important to keep in mind. By the way, how's my pace? Everybody okay? I'm doing a lot of breathing.
I can hear you great. I can hear you great.
I'm not kidding. Like, I'm modeling. Like, I'm doing a lot of breathing. Okay, can I get rid of the poll now?
Yeah, I thought I stopped sharing the results, so you might just close your window.
Okay, great. I want to show, before we start talking about moving forward, I want you to look at this mood meter. You know what color you're in. Can you choose a word? Try. I know it can be hard because you might be feeling a couple. Can you choose one word that describes how you're feeling right now? Look at that quadrant. Write that down on that piece of paper that you have. Is this a different emotion than you noted earlier? We know emotions aren't stagnant, aren't static. And I'm going to ask you the same question I did earlier. Will this emotion help or hinder your learning? This one you just wrote down. Will it help or hinder your learning? And the follow-up question, what strategies can you employ to either stay with this emotion or shift it? Do you have strategies that you can implement to stay with this emotion, or if you feel necessary, to shift it? That's where self-management comes in. That's what we're going to talk about next. But before we do that, I just want to show you this mood meter. Now, it doesn't have 4 quadrants, doesn't have colors. Well, it has colors of the emojis. But here's an example. This mood meter was created by the iCenter. But here's an example of how you could integrate social emotional learning and self-awareness specifically into your Hebrew curriculum. Now, maybe someone will come up with a mood meter that has 4 quadrants and colors and includes these emojis or these words, these emotions in Hebrew. It's a wonderful way to integrate it into your Hebrew curriculum. Just an example. And I think I've included the link on the slide. So when you get it, if you're interested, but you really could just Google iCenter mood meter and it'll come up. All right, let's talk about self-management. Self-management is the ability to manage one's emotions, thoughts, and behaviors, to do so effectively in different situations so that you can achieve your goals and aspirations. This is all about self-regulation. I've paired it with this text from Proverbs. One who is slow to anger is better than the mighty, and one who rules over their spirit better than one who conquers a city. I don't love the rule over. I wish it said manages their spirit. I can't change Proverbs, but you get the idea. So this sums up why we need to teach self-management skills. Never in the history of Calm Down has anyone calmed down by being told to calm down. Like we laugh about it, but it's so true. In the heat of the moment, when emotions are high, someone telling you to calm down is not going to be effective. We need to learn these skills so that when we're in this situation, we can calm down. So I'm going to teach you 4 breathing strategies that are tools for self-management. Now, why breathing? Breathing deep breathing reduces heart rate, blood pressure, it lowers tension in the body, and it stimulates the parasympathetic nervous system to promote a state of calmness. We have a physiological response when we do deep breathing. Now, I'm going to go out on a limb here and say that for some of you, when we did the check-in and I said we were going to do some breathing, there was probably some eye rolling. Now, it might have been outward, it may not have been outward eye rolling, but it was definitely inward. And that's because we sometimes associate breathing with meditation, which many people don't do or feel comfortable with. Or maybe you're just not comfortable with this idea of stopping and breathing. So what I'm going to ask you to do, eye rolling or not, let's just practice with me some deep breathing strategies and let's see how it feels. So the first thing, I'm going to tilt my computer a little bit so you can see. I want you to put one hand on your chest and one hand on your belly. Now, when we feel intense emotions, we breathe from up here. We breathe from our chests. Deep breathing comes from the belly first and then the chest. So you're going to take a deep breath in and you're going to fill your belly first and then your chest. So breathe in, filling the belly and then the chest, and let out the chest and then the belly. Again, breathe in, filling the belly and the chest, and then the chest. Exhale from the chest and the belly. One more time, breathe in, Filling the belly and the chest, letting out in the chest and the belly. Great. That's very different than when we breathe up here. And like I said, we tend to breathe up here when we're feeling intense emotions. My early childhood educators, maybe you know this breathing exercise. I love this one. You're going to pretend that in one hand you have a flower and one hand you have a candle. And you're going to breathe in, smell that flower, and blow out the candle. Breathe in, smell that beautiful flower, and blow out the candle. Right? Our youngest learners can do this, and they can practice it. The next one is 5-finger breathing. You can just follow on my hand, or if you want, you can do it on your own. It doesn't matter. What we're going to do is as I trace my finger up, my finger, you're going to inhale, and as I come down, you're going to exhale. So it's inhale and exhale. 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 5-finger breathing. And the last one I want to show you is called a Hoberman sphere. Can everybody see it? You can get these on Amazon or in a toy store. When I pull it apart, we're going to inhale, and when I push it together, we're going to exhale. So inhale and exhale. Inhale and exhale. Inhale and exhale. Using the Hoberman sphere. I actually love to do this when I have groups because everybody can see it. It's a great visual. So those are 4 strategies of breathing that you can use to teach self-management. This idea of stopping and breathing to lower the intensity of emotion. Everybody with me? Any comments? Any thoughts? We're good? I'm just looking in the chat for 1 minute. Someone said smelling the soup and cooling it. I love that. That's also great. That's great to do on Fridays before Shabbat. I love that. Oh, the toy was called the Hoberman sphere. Hoberman sphere. It's the 4th bullet. And by the way, this will help us too, right? Before we enter into, or we feel our emotions, we actually can do that breathing too.
There was a great question that just came up, Nancy, of would you use this breathing in a moment of crisis or just randomly while teaching?
Okay, so it is a great question. Again, you have to practice it so that when you're in that moment of crisis, you can employ the deep breathing. So before, I wasn't kidding when Rabbi Dreffin said to me, you know, you're speaking fairly quickly and people are, you know, can you speak a little bit louder? So I know when I'm excited, I speak quickly. By the way, my New York accent comes out too. So when I'm excited, but I know that happens. So I took a breath to slow down. But if I hadn't practiced, if I had not done any learning of that breathing strategy, it would not be effective. So yes, use it in a crisis, but you have to first practice it. I'll give you an example of how to use it in the classroom in a moment. I want to share one more tool, and then I'll give you an example of how you can use it in a classroom, not in a quote unquote crisis, but to model it in real time. I want to share this tool with you. It's called a feelings fingerprint. And this tool builds both self-awareness and self-management. Now, often we feel things in our body that help us identify what we're feeling. So the first question is here, how does my body tell me when I'm upset? Now, for me, I clench my jaw. I feel this tightness right around my jawline. This is my body's way of sending me a message about how I'm feeling. And sometimes I notice that tightness even before I'm able to articulate how I'm feeling. How does your body send you the message when you're getting upset? Some people get headaches. Some people start to perspire. The body sends us messages about what we're feeling, and often even before we're able to articulate it. The second question, when do I find it hard to stay calm? What are those situations that trigger this response? This is really empowering. If I know that I get excited or nervous or anxious before I give a presentation at a board meeting, maybe I need to stop and do some breathing before I enter in. Now, I'm going to be completely transparent. Before I got on for this webinar, I did do some breathing. That doesn't mean that I wasn't excited as I was starting to learn with all of you. And I was totally pumped after the breakout room with the great learning I did with my group. So again, it's not just doing it once, but being aware and knowing when to implement it. And when I find myself in those situations, by the way, and for me, like I said, if I feel this tightness in my jaw and face, the first thing I'm going to do is tell myself to stop, to pause. And then I tell myself, Nancy, keep calm. And then I breathe. Now, in this case, if I'm getting angry or I'm getting really upset, this tool recommends you inhale for a count of 5. Inhale 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Hold for 2. And then exhale 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then acknowledge that you did this and that you did it well. Self-talk is a very effective way to regulate and manage one's emotions. Now I want to give you an example, as I promised, about how would you use this in the classroom as the educator. Again, I'm sure this never happens to any of you. I've given directions to all my learners, my adult learners too, by the way, and nobody's doing anything that I told them to do. Again, I'm sure it never happens to you. And I find myself, my heart is starting to race a little bit and I'm starting to sweat. I can stop and say in front of my learners, I need to stop. I need to take a few breaths. And I'm going to try to give the directions maybe in a different way so that everyone can hear them. And perhaps it will be more clear as to what my expectations are. That's modeling, right? That's modeling breathing. Or I could take it one step further and say, I'm feeling frustrated. I can name it, or I'm feeling it in my jaw. This is sending me a message that I'm frustrated. So I'm just going to breathe. And I'm going to try again, right? So these are ways, as educators, that we can model for them. They know we have these feelings too. We can model them for our learners. Okay, any other questions, any other thoughts before we talk about how we integrate this into our curriculum and daily schedule? Any questions? Okay. Thank you for all that you're sharing, all this wisdom and experience. It's great. Thank you so much. I do love the idea, by the way. Someone, Elaine said she created a safe space. Sometimes it's really wonderful to have a separate area. And by the way, if you've taught feelings fingerprint, put that up in that safe space. Put up a picture of 5-finger breathing. Put a Hoberman sphere in it. Give them those tools and the prompts so that they can calm down. Okay? All right, great. All right, let's talk about the integration of social emotional learning into our daily schedules and curricula. And I just want to be clear. I recognize that you already have a lot on your plate. Personally, I believe social emotional learning is the plate, but regardless, social emotional learning is not something separate or yet another thing that you are going to be asked to teach. Rather, it can be integrated into your daily routine and curricula. So let's start with daily routines. Transitions are hard. They're hard for most people. Starting and ending your day or your learning experience with a check-in can give you an awful lot of information about yourself and your students. And it actually can be a way to help them focus and to make that transition to begin learning with you. When I was in the breakout room, Stephanie talked about how she does this with her learners. And again, it doesn't have to be necessarily only in the beginning or only at the end. It can also be done during transitions in the middle. Before you go into tefillah, prayer is another wonderful way to focus, to pause, to check in with our learners. Always keeping in mind that transitions are not easy. Let's talk about Torah. Any story. You can ask your learners, what were the characters feeling? Does the text actually tell us what the characters are feeling? And by the way, this is a wonderful skill to teach. What's the pshat? In other words, what does the text actually tell us about how the character is feeling? And if it doesn't, then what do you think they're feeling? That's the drash, reading in between the lines. What do you think they're feeling? When could they, or should they have, paused and taken a breath? There are so many examples of that in the Torah. Use the text to talk about self-awareness and self-management. Let's just look at yesterday's portion, Korach. It begins with Korach and 250 Israelites challenging the leadership of Moses and Aaron. Korach tells Moses he's gone too far. All of the community is holy, all of them, and that God's in their midst. And then we're told Moses fell on his face. From Korach's words, what do you imagine he's feeling? The text doesn't tell us. What do you imagine he's feeling? What do you imagine Moses is feeling? What might have been different if Korach paused and took a breath and then spoke to Moses? What would have happened if Moses took a breath before he responded? These are all opportunities to talk about self-awareness and self-management. Prayer, tefillah. We start our morning saying Modani, this beautiful prayer of gratitude, waking up, starting another day. Now, when we teach Modani, or when we're praying it, what's the question we typically ask? What are you grateful for? It's a great question. But I want to pose a different question. What does gratitude feel like? What does it feel like in your body? What does gratitude feel like? Do you know what gratitude feels like in your body? Another question. What do you think happened in the life of the person who wrote this prayer, that they were filled with such gratitude that they wrote a prayer about it? By the way, this opens up a whole conversation about who writes prayers. A lot of kids think God writes prayers. And then you can ask them, when did they experience that kind of gratitude? What would their prayer have been? Very different conversation about prayer. What does singing the prayer together in community versus just saying it, what's the difference? How does each one make them feel? All of this offers a very different conversation and relationship to prayer. And again, you're integrating these skills into prayer, your prayer curricula. You're not a curriculum. You're not just teaching this separately. And lastly, holidays. Holidays provide ample opportunity to talk about self-awareness and self-management. Whether it's looking at any of the holiday stories and like Torah, asking what the characters might be feeling. You can also ask your learners what emotions emerge for them when they think about a particular holiday. I want to share a story about this. When I was first kind of diving into social, emotional, and spiritual learning, I was teaching sixth graders about Yom Kippur. We were talking about forgiveness, and I asked them, what feelings do you have or do you associate with the holiday of Yom Kippur? And one student said that he is scared when he thinks about it. It frightens him. And when we talked a little bit more about it, he shared with us that he didn't want to believe that his fate was predetermined on a particular day. And then this led to a conversation about his belief in God. If he believed in a God that offers forgiveness, did he also have to believe in a God that punishes? And how that made him feel. And by the way, asking our learners how they think God feels, or perhaps what God might have done differently if God paused and took a breath. Again, this opens up powerful conversations about God and personal theology. So these are just examples. I really want to pause here to talk about if you have any questions at all about what I've just kind of spoke about, gone over.
There's a quick question about how old the student was that was afraid.
Sixth grade, so 12. Any questions? I see that someone someone had a question. Did someone want to unmute themselves and ask?
I think it's set so they can't, that if you're a participant, you're not a host, you have to throw it in the chat, please.
Throw it in the chat and I'll answer it.
Actually, it just gave me an opportunity to unmute, so if it's okay, I'll ask the question or just make the comment verbally, and that is music in the prayers is a great reflector of the emotions contained in the contents of the prayers. Just wanted to put that out there.
I appreciate that.
Especially the example of Yom Kippur. There's many, many ways of chanting the Chatzi Kaddish, but the one just before the Unatana Tokov is what I call the scary version, and for good reason, because we're going to talk about very scary stuff about 10 minutes later.
Mm-hmm. Very true. Very true. And I think music in general can set such a powerful tone. Just watching the video, I don't know how many of you were on earlier and were able to watch the video that Rabbi Dreffen shared and the singing by the participants. That set a mood, right? That set an emotional tone. How could you not smile looking at those faces of those kids and listening to the singing. Like I said, I felt like I should come in and be singing or tap dancing my intro, right? It sets an emotional tone. Music does that. And again, I'm not so sure we ask those kinds of questions about how we feel when we sing in community, or how we feel when we are praying a particular prayer. I want to add one other thing. I said before, you could ask, how does gratitude feel? Another great question is, what does gratitude look like? What does gratitude feel like? What does gratitude sound like? Right? Have them make a list so that they know. You have a conversation about, oh, this is what gratitude looks like. When we're feeling grateful, this is what it looks like. By the way, you can do that with any trait. What does patience look like? What does patience sound like? What does patience feel like? Have those conversations. I'll give you, I want to just throw in one more example before we move on. We're almost done. I have 10 minutes, right?
12, yeah.
12, I'll take it. We often think we have effectively taught our learners to listen. I'm not so sure that we intentionally teach them this skill. But if you ask your learners, what does active listening look like? What does active listening sound like? And what does it feel like? That opens up a really interesting conversation about behaviors, expectations of listening, that is very different than just saying, oh, we want everyone to sit quietly when somebody else is talking, right? Because you're teaching them specific skills. Does that make sense to everybody? Like a thumbs up if it does? Okay. Same thing when we're teaching a Jewish value. Let's take an example of, I didn't have values here, but let's take an example of Hagnasat Orchim, welcoming strangers, welcoming people. We have to teach those skills, right? We have to be able to talk about what does welcoming look like? What kind of behaviors make somebody feel welcome? What kind of behaviors make somebody feel welcomed? Right? These are we can't just make the assumption, again, that they have these skills. Okay? All right, great. Now, I don't know, I would love, if you're up for it, I want to just kind of see how everybody's doing. I'd love to spend 5 minutes. Rabbi Dreffin, if you can put us back into it, would you be able to put us back?
Yeah, we're ready to go. I was just waiting for you to say the word.
Let's go back in. And what I'd love everybody to do is brainstorm ideas of how you would integrate self-awareness and self-management into your daily curricula. I know this might be new for some of you, maybe you're familiar with it, but let's take 5 minutes, maybe 6, and let's brainstorm ideas. Let's learn from each other how to integrate social emotional learning into the curricula or your daily schedule.
All right, here we go.
Thank you. Okay, we've been thrown back in and we're being recorded. And Elaine, I'm sorry you got cut off in the middle of your sentence. We had a nice conversation. I felt very fortunate to be learning with that group. So thank you very much. I hope everybody else had some good ideas, and maybe the discussion made you think a little bit about, well, maybe you're doing social emotional learning in a specific way, and that kind of the discussion highlighted that, or maybe and maybe you're thinking about other ways it can be integrated. So I wish that, oh, I have to share my screen. I just clicked on my screen thinking that you could see it. There we go. There we go. So I wish that I had time to talk about all of these competencies. We don't, but I just wanted to talk, just tell you what those competencies are before we end with a reflection. So social awareness is the ability to take the perspective of somebody else. This is all about empathy and caring. Relationship skills, the ability to establish and maintain healthy and supportive relationships. Listening and communication skills are centered to this. And responsible decision-making, the ability to make caring and constructive choices about personal behavior and social interactions. This is part 2. I hope that in the future I get to learn with you about these competencies. And with that, I just want to end our time together with a reflection. Maybe you're aware of it. It's called SIM. It's something, think about something that either surprised you, inspired you, or moved you. Something that surprised you, inspired you, or moved you. Now, what I'd like you to do is I want you to type it in the chat, but I don't want you to hit the return button and enter it. So think for a minute. I'm going to give you a full minute. So I didn't freeze. Think of something that surprised, inspired, or moved you, and type it in the chat, but don't hit the return.
Nancy, while people are typing, there's just a quick question if someone was asking how to integrate the mood meter chart into an actual religious schoolroom. So if you had like 1 or 2 specific examples before we sign off.
As far as like how I would actually use it?
Yeah, the mood meter.
So there are a lot of different ways, and depending on which one you want to use, I would start my learning. And again, I've done this with adults and with younger learners. Start my learning with breathing to center everybody and ask them to look at the mood meter and identify how they're feeling. Or they read a piece of text and they look at that mood meter. What do you think the character in the story was feeling? Maybe the mood meter helps them identify that, that emotion.
Excellent, thank you.
Okay. All right. So everyone has hopefully typed and something in the chat. What I'd like you to do now is hit the enter button. Hit the return. Man, we see so much coming up. Great. Now, I'm just going to take a minute to look through a couple. Now, why did I ask you to type it in but not hit the enter button? A lot of times when we ask people to reflect on something, especially when we're on Zoom and people start to share that right away, creates anxiety for those who haven't thought of something yet, or maybe they just can't type that fast. And when you're in person, when people start to share right away, sometimes it influences what other people are thinking. So this is a way of exercising wait time on Zoom. So I'm going to stop my share. Thank you for participating in that. And I just want to say, thank you so much for giving me the privilege to learn with all of you today. Don't think for one moment you are not doing holy work and changing the lives of each and every student. You are. And thank you so much, especially with this unprecedented year, for doing that holy work. Thank you so much for having me.